Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Nathaniel Mellor.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
And today we're going to be talking about over-tourism in Italy specifically, and how you can be a better tourist, I think. We're not going to probably word it like that in the title because that sounds a little aggressive, but maybe 9 tips for being the best possible tourist to combat over-tourism. And boy, that is a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
But I think this is mostly because we were going to do an episode on Rome Condensed. We wanted to revisit our Rome Condensed episode and update it because it's been about 2 or 3 years, I think, since that came out. I want to say 3. I want to err on the side of 3. And it's not out of date entirely, but some of it is. So we'd like to go through and sort of update it and kind of make it a little fresh and sparkling and, well, more accurate, I guess, is a big thing. And then we saw all these articles about how there's over-tourism and these southern countries in Europe are sort of banding together to sort of fight over-tourism. And then, of course, there's like this article about Sirmione in Italy, as well as the upcoming nuptials of Jeff Bezos in, where is it? Venice? Yeah.
Venice. Mm-hmm.
I'm like spacing as if it's not the biggest article happening. And so we kind of wanted to touch on those because I think every year we've done an episode that's essentially on, I think the beginning of the summer, there's always those articles about how, like, you know, tourism is going to end Italy as a country.
How tourism is ruining everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So
I think we do an episode usually addressing it.
So I think this is the episode. This is this year's episode. Welcome to the 2025 edition of Are You Ruining Italy by Coming Here?
And the answer ultimately is no, you're not, even if there are lots of articles and things out there making it seem like maybe you are. And I think even our last year's episode was, is Italy breaking up with you or something like that?
Yes,
and
it was.
The answer is no, she's not.
But she's just asking for a little break.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're not. But cut to the chase. As a tourist, you're not ruining anything, but it is important to be conscious of your contribution to the problem. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into it, we just want to say that we know there's a lot going on in the world, and there often is, but it feels like especially right now there's a lot going on. And we are both we read the news every day. We know what's going on. But we know that you don't come here to hear about the news. We're not a news podcast, but we do just want to say that we know what's going on, and we are specifically avoiding talking about any tragedy, anything political on this podcast, because this is about travel and it is intended mostly to be a lighthearted 1 hour situation every week. Does that make sense?
I think we basically don't want to come across like we're sort of borderline sociopathic and as if like there's nothing that matters in this world outside of coming to Italy. And we just realize there is, but it's the same thing. Like you don't go to, I don't know, Lonely Planet for news updates. Like they're going to still tell you to go to places even though you probably shouldn't go to places, kind of thing. So it's the same vein is essentially what we're getting at. We feel the need to say that sometimes, I think, because it's almost as if, like, I don't know, between last week and even this week, a lot has happened, and it's kind of weird to just be like, anyway, back to Italy, right, guys?
Right, exactly.
So we do
it feels like a little superficial sometimes.
Incredibly, yeah.
So we just want to say, we're doing this, we're talking about coming to Italy, and also there's other stuff going on in the world. We just want to acknowledge that.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say that our hearts absolutely go out to those of you who are affected. If anybody listening is affected by the disaster, the tragedy of the Air India flight, that is just genuinely horrific and heartbreaking. And yeah, we just, I mean, that when we saw the news, it was just a sort of I think like everybody just sort of watching with sort of speechless horror, basically. So we did want to mention that though, because we did see that, and that was horrible.
Yeah, and our hearts go out to all the friends and family who are dealing with that right now.
Absolutely. With that being said,
let's first thank everybody, I think, for listening. That's a good positive.
Really rough intro, yeah.
It was, yeah. So thank you all for listening. Welcome. If this is your first episode you're listening to, we do tend to start off a little bit more happy, positive. So keep that in mind for next week, hopefully when you listen again. But thank you everybody for listening. Thank you everybody who has been reaching out and sending us review or giving us reviews, and also sending us, questions about their trip. We love interacting with people and giving suggestions. And thank you everybody who has donated to us. I can talk. Donated to us. I did it again.
You can't say that. Yeah, you can't say you can talk.
Thank you to those of you who have donated to us on Ko-fi. You are very quickly helping us get to our goal of buying new mics,
Absolutely.
which won't help me talk any better with my pronunciation and such, but will make me sound better, I hope.
Yeah. And if you'd like, and thank you again, those also who are following us. If you'd like to follow
Yes.
us, you can do so Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I believe you can follow us there. We have a website, onlybag.com. If you do have any of those questions that Darcy mentioned, any comments, any concerns, any updates, anything like that, especially if you are listening to past episodes and you notice that something's out of date or no longer correct or anything like that, please let us know, because I realize some of this does change sort of. I mean, some of it is very much week to week. We realize it's changing. So anything you have, anything you'd like to say, anything like to mention, any questions you have, you can reach out. Our contact form, onlyabag.com, or honestly, you can send us a message on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast. We absolutely respond to messages there. If you'd like to follow us there as well, you can. We almost never post because we are terrible at taking photos, but we have an Instagram account for when we do post. And I think that's, everything. Let's just hop right in.
Okay, let's do it.
And I think hopping in is actually, the first thing is news, Italy news. And the two biggest Italy news, I think, that are specific to Italy, while it's still tangent to over-tourism. One is Sirmione, a very small town near on Lake Garda in
And
the
it's
north.
near Lake Como, right?
It's not near
Ish.
Lake Como. Well, it's just in the north.
Oh, okay.
I think it's almost like maybe an alternative to Lake Como.
Got it. Okay.
In the sense that some people are like, do I go to Como or do I go to specifically Lake Garda? But like Sirmione is more of like it's almost kind of like, it seems like not wealthy, but it's like some famous people tend to go there, or like I think like Theresa May, the former prime minister, will take a yearly vacation there, kind of thing. So it's a little bit sort of, I don't know, it's an upscale. I don't know if it's more upscale than Como, but it's certainly smaller than Como. So there's a natural sense of it being more maybe elite, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, it attracts a lot of tourists, specifically a lot of day trippers. It is not that far away from Milan, so it's easy to get to in a day, and a lot of people do. But recently they mentioned that they're having a lot of issues, specifically in May Day, I think May 1st of this year, 2025. There was like a 2-hour wait to get into the city, which is insane. It's a city, right? There should be no wait, especially like when you're walking.
But there's this like famous, what was a drawbridge, right? Where is it a walled city?
It's a city that's technically, I think, on the water. So there is, I think the drawbridge is either active or still active or partially active, or was a
But
drawbridge.
it's a famous bridge that you can cross, and it's no longer like a working drawbridge. It's a stable bridge that just stays there, right?
I don't know. It might still be a drawbridge.
But people walk across this bridge, and you take pictures, and it's somewhat famous for the town, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And but essentially it has like boats are parked there and things like that, and it's just supposed to be gorgeous. And there are people who work in, who live outside, have to go in, and then vice versa at the end of the day. And a large part of it is that cars are allowed on this bridge, and a lot of people who live in the town should think that they should not be allowed, because they're essentially like, when the bridge is barely wider than the car, so
It's
it kind
small,
of.
yeah. When you look at photos of it, it's a small bridge.
Well, and their anger, speaking of this sort of elitism, is that there are wealthy people who want a car ride all the way to the hotel. And I say wealthy, again, I do mean sort of former, prime ministers, sort of, wealthy, not necessarily like, I have some money. It's like everybody else is just walking to their hotel. All this being said is they've enacted a couple different things, including these street tutors that are supposed to just basically people that are around, invest, and they are kind of almost like, I don't know, not even like a police force, but just like, please don't do that force. You can ask them questions, even though that is not their intent. Like they're not there for you to ask questions in terms of like, where's my hotel? Where's a bathroom? Where's this? How do I do that thing? Which is, again, very confusing, because when they have the name tutor, Tutor, in their name, it implies that you're supposed to ask them questions. Anyway, the reason I wanted to bring that up is that is emblematic of this over-tourism problem that a lot of Italy is having. Likewise, Jeff Bezos is getting married in, what day? It's like the 17th. So anywhere between 2 weeks, 1 and 2 weeks away. My understanding is nobody really knows the dates until it happens. I don't know how. I've read a couple articles, and it seems like it's all being kept under wraps. Like his team has booked out a couple of hotels and a couple of this, and they claim to have booked out this like all of the water taxis in Venice.
But it seems like they've almost booked everything they possibly could, like in the city, because they don't want other people to be there.
And that is the sort of the energy that is definitely being put off. And I think the reason I want to mention this one is it sort of ties into this, our next segue, which is essentially city councilors or city officials versus the people who live in a town, if that makes sense. And I think a big issue that we see is that the people who live in a place are often at odds with the people who run that place. So if that makes sense, I think essentially that's going to be also the foundation for some of this episode as well. So the idea of sirmione, which is like, is essentially many people doing something that isn't wrong necessarily, create a problem together. And then also this idea that sometimes the city has a different opinion on something than the people living in the city, which is also something we see. I know Barcelona is sort of every year there's another, I mean, only for the last 2 or 3 years, but there's another article about how it's sort of like Barcelonans armed with water pistols are going through the streets and squirting tourists. And it's kind of, I guess we basically wanted to mention that first, not specifically Barcelonans, but this idea that by you being here in Italy, you are in the way.
Yeah, I think over-tourism is a problem. That's a fact. But tourists are obviously the face of that problem, but it's not all on tourists. I think a lot of the issue comes from the city management, and sometimes cities, and this is not the people who actually live in the city, I'm saying like the government of the city, relying on tourism in some places as part of the economy, but not having a structure in place to adequately manage tourists.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, and that's
of course, we've all seen, like every year there's things with like tourists jumping in fountains, or tourists, I think one of the issues in Sirmione was people sitting or walking in flower beds, which is just weird anywhere. Like, don't trample flowers.
But I think part of it is they were trying to get out of the way, but the only place to get out of the way is on these flower beds. So they would sit on the edge of the flower bed, but then not realize that they would lay back into the flowers, or when they stand up and like stumble slightly, because some people, you'd stumble back into the flowers. So then these people are like, can you not sit in the, like...
That's a tricky one. Okay.
It is, because it's like, oh, I am out of the way, but like you're out of the way in an area you shouldn't be sitting. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, that sort of thing of, we mentioned this so often, and we're going to keep probably mentioning this over the lifetime of this podcast, but there is a interesting disconnect, I think, between certain Italian cities not coming across, or towns not coming across as an actual functioning town, and instead coming across like a theme park.
Of course.
Like, I think it doesn't, I don't know, but there's this, sometimes I think of like, you wouldn't, like in a theme park, there might be signage everywhere, and don't do this and don't do that, and this is not allowed, and everything, signs are posted and rules are posted. But then in a town, that's weird. Like, even your own town, I'm thinking like, I'm using Savannah, American town, as an example. There might be one keep off the grass sign if it's like out front of a courthouse or something like that, where it's like, this is green grass, it should stay, I don't know, untouched, don't keep off the grass. But It's one sign, it's not posted everywhere. And it's just like, yeah, if you didn't see the sign, you're gonna get a fine. It's sorry.
I think we all know too that there are different kinds, obviously there's different kinds of people, and there are different kinds of tourists. And I think about, when we think about the way sometimes people treat different Italian towns as a theme park, I think about Disney World. Sure. And there are obviously masses of people go to Disney World every year, and Disneyland. And there are a lot of people who just are polite, wait in lines, buy their things as a memento, see the characters, whatever. They're lovely people. And then there are people who go there with reckless abandon, don't hang on to their children, encourage them to run amok, don't respect the character actors, whatever they're, crew members. So there's likewise, anywhere that you go, there are different kinds of tourists. There are people who aren't respectful, and there are people who are. We are assuming, dear listeners, that you're all very respectful travelers. But it can be easy, like we were just saying, to accidentally stumble into flowers, or accidentally do something that you don't realize you're doing, something that is incidentally hurting the community that you're enjoying. Does that make sense?
No, I think just on that note, because this all builds, essentially, if you're wondering where we're going with this, we're sort of building the foundation of the episode. And on that note is, we've again talked about this before, but in case this is your first time listening, like other cities, other countries, and we know Italy specifically, so it's easy to talk about Italy, but there are a lack of what I would consider guardrails, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But again, it's just like visiting anywhere else, but I think when you go to a place like, I'm using Savannah, where we're from, as an example, because it's highly trafficked, highly touristy. And again, likewise, there's no guardrails. Like, if your kid runs in the street, your kid runs in the street. There's no crew member to stop them from doing that. It's you stopping them. But because I think it looks like any other, I mean, it looks like any other American street. It's easy to be like, oh, that's the street, that's the sidewalk. And I think in Italy, where a lot of the time it blends, a lot of the time it's because the street and the sidewalk are the same things in a lot of
sometimes
cities.
streets don't look like they can take cars down them. They look like pedestrian streets.
Absolutely.
But surprise, a car comes rushing
Or a
down the
Vespa.
street.
Yeah, exactly. And then again, same thing with these sort of, oh, I just assume when we're here, like because we're like in a walled city or closed in, there's not really anywhere they can go. And it's like, no, I mean, these people didn't put up like barricades or like guardrails or anything like that. They can run off the edge of they can find a high point and slip. They can, there's so many things that happened recently, in Spain. It was a British tourist fell off the top of an aqueduct.
Oh,
and it was
yes.
just sort of and again, a lot of people are like, well, not to blame you, but what were you doing up there?
Yeah.
Why would you up? Why were you there? And I think that's the thing when it comes to Italy is, we've noticed especially, there's a lot of places in Italy specifically where you can sit with your legs dangled over the edge of something, and it is a very far drop, and there's nothing in the way. It's just there's an assumption that yes, you're not going to slip, right? Or you're not going to sit there even. And again, this is all the idea to build this entire over tourism episode. Italy does have, I think, a very big belief in personal responsibility. So essentially, they're like, we're going to have very little. There's no real cage. There's nothing to keep you contained. There's no guardrails. We are hopefully relying on you to keep yourself contained.
Personal responsibility. And speaking of sitting on things and falling off of them, recently, what was in Verona,
exactly.
Museum patron, someone visiting museum, sat on a Swarovski crystal encrusted chair that was meant to look like a Van Gogh chair, a chair from a Van Gogh painting, right? So this person sat on what was a piece of art because they thought it was just a regular chair.
No. Oh, no. His basically was a couple.
Yeah.
And the wife sort of squatted over it, pretending like she was sitting on it.
Oh,
and he
I
took
didn't
a photo
see
of
that
her.
part.
And then they switched, and so he pretended to, and it seems like he couldn't sort of. Like his thigh muscles.
Oh, I thought he thought it was just a chair to sit in.
He intentionally. They had waited actually, and that was part of the issue. They'd waited until the docent left the room to do this.
Oh, that's so much worse.
It's actually.
I thought
bad.
It was an accident.
No, it was a full on. They waited till the docent left. The guy pretended to sit down, and it was clearly like you can't. There's no audio, but clearly his wife or whoever he's with is communicating like it doesn't look like you're sitting down. It looks like you're squatting over a chair. So just maybe sit on the corner. So he sat on the corner, and that's when
it shattered.
Or it broke basically in a bunch of pieces. And on that, and that's like I think one of our things is essentially you would never do that that's just not something I think you would do ever.
No.
People because I think there's that sort of mob mentality or group mentality, or sometimes when you're on vacation, you definitely do things you wouldn't normally do. Often in a good way.
Right.
Like I would never go out partying until 1 a.m, but man, these Italians.
Have an extra glass of limoncello.
Exactly. No, I think there's some people like I would never do that back home, but I do it when I'm on vacation, or I'll do it in Italy. I'll do it when somebody's encouraging me, but not like in a weird way, just like in a way of like, hey,
just like let loose, like in a fun, responsible way.
And so I think there's definitely an argument to be made of like, the sort of, oh my God, I would never consider doing that. Like I would never have done that, back home. What was I thinking? But also there's that sort of thing of, the idea that this is all here for you specifically as like the main character, and it's not. It's for everybody to share.
It's hard too because there are people like this person who broke that chair who I thought it was a complete accident. That is wild that they were actually trying to sit on this piece of art that they knew was art. And so you see like that, you see every year people getting into the fountains in Rome where we all know you're not supposed to be playing in the fountains. It's not a swimming pool. People carving their name on the Colosseum or in parts of Pompeii, things like that. And I think it obviously makes it a lot harder for all the other tourists who are being respectful. And you all, and we, when we are tourists, end up bearing the burden of people who are acting irresponsibly, which is really hard.
Yeah, and I think it tends to be, at least in the articles, part of the reason I think we want to talk about this is it tends to be people from English-speaking countries that end up as the people who are doing things they shouldn't do, which is, again, it's amazing. Sometimes the Italian sort of, whether they're the ministers or whatever they sound baffled. They're like, why would you do that, though? What would give you the impression that would be okay? Like, and so, and again, that is essentially the foundation of the episode. So here are, I think we have 7 or 8 pieces of advice, tips on how to be essentially the best possible tourist. And we know you will be, obviously. We're coming at this, as we mentioned before, from a point of view of you aren't necessarily the problem. There is a larger issue. And, by just traveling, because we should travel as people, we should open up our minds to new experiences. We should, experience new cultures, new languages, new people, customs, etc. It's hard to do that when it's been basically altered in such a way that it almost feels like no matter what you do, you are causing untold damage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you're flying? How much CO2 are you wasting? How much you're going to stay at this place? Oh, you're destroying a local economy. You're destroying this. It's like, I just wanted to see a different place.
I just wanted to see a cool thing.
Yeah. And so I think it's become this thing where and a part of it too is social media kind of encourage, like, if you're not doing this thing, then you're doing it wrong.
Right.
So that being said, this is all in to establish the fact that, hey, when you go traveling, here are some 7, 8, I can't remember exactly how many we have.
7-ish.
7-ish tips on how to be the best possible tourist, and also sort of combat over-tourism, or combat maybe negative over-tourism. If maybe there's a positive form of it, let's just say, because I think you mentioned it's always a bad thing, in case somebody listening thinks, actually, it could be a good thing under these conditions, then on the off chance that exists, then this is how to ideally combat negative over-tourism. That sort of leaves just a sour taste in people's mouth.
So our first tip is on personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. There's a lot of S's in that. And acknowledging that you physically take up space when you are somewhere, which can sometimes have a negative effect.
Absolutely.
So, like you were saying earlier, there are no guardrails. Even in museums, there are often no, those alarms that happen whenever you get too close to a piece of art.
Proximity ones that beep.
Yeah, exactly. There's sometimes no stanchions around certain places where you shouldn't be.
That one, I will say, I just as an interject, that's becoming more and more common, like rather than more and more common to not have stanchions.
Right.
If that makes sense. I feel like 10 years ago, it was like stanchions everywhere, even like in Italy when we first came. And now it's like, oh, this room is just empty except for the art. But it's not like a proximity one. You can get really close to it. And I think you do when you look at brushstrokes.
Oh, I get so close to art sometimes I have to stop myself.
Yeah.
I'm like touching it with my nose.
What is the stroke there? What is it? And so I just wanted to jump into that one because you would think that like it's becoming more and more sort of, I don't know, curated in the sense of like, this is a museum, but it's almost like, it seems like the mentality of curators might be going the other way, which is like
you don't want to block the art. You want it to be people to be immersed, be able to be immersed in it.
Like, let's just put you in a room with art, nothing else in the way. And that seems to be, again, though, relying on you as a person to not, touch it.
Right.
Essentially.
Which is hard sometimes. I'm going to be honest. I know I've never touched, someone else's art. But I do get really close wanting to look at the brushstrokes. And sometimes also I'm a little clumsy. So I have to be very aware of my body and not bump into things or get too close to art,
Yeah, no, exactly.
Another one that is good to remember and kind of hard to do sometimes is not sitting or leaning on or harming any sort of like ancient architecture.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about in Pompeii, there are, obviously you have to sit down, and at a lot of these historic sites, there is not intentional seating for visitors.
Yeah.
So sometimes in Pompeii, you will end up sitting on an ancient step, and that's just going to happen. But it is also important to remember that not everything is a seat,
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing.
which takes your own critical thinking, essentially. But it's just important to remember to respect the spaces that you're in.
There is a huge lack of seating in a lot of public spaces. I think in Italy, that's just a problem with Italy specifically. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy to default into if I can't sit, I might as well just, if I can't sit on a bench designed for this, I might as well just sit on this thing. And then it's not uncommon for somebody to come yell at you and be like, don't sit there. And again, even on that note, just for those of you going, you cannot sit on the Spanish Steps in Rome, for example. That the police will come and say, do not do this. Or you cannot sit on the edge of the Trevi Fountain. Sometimes you can get away with it because you'll see people, and then every once in a while the cops get tired and
that is hard because I think those are two somewhat new-ish things. I know
the Spanish Steps, I think definitely are. Yeah, it's like post-COVID.
Yeah, and we have sat on the Spanish Steps before for a few minutes doing, I don't know, eating something.
Or just sitting.
Yeah. Tired. But then now you're not allowed to. We've been tisked at. And then at a certain point, I remember we were sitting not on the edge of the Trevi Fountain, but there's on each side, there's kind of corners where it dips back into the rock wall, essentially. And I remember sitting there for again, a few minutes at some point, and it was completely allowed. But that might have been during COVID, and there were a lot fewer people.
Because even sitting the edge of the rim, it's like they almost let you kind of sit there for a second, take a photo.
Take a photo,
but as
then
soon
you have
as,
to
but
move.
if you're like chilling out, the cop will whistle and be like, no, get up.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of wiggle room, but it's still sometimes you see somebody else doing it and you're like, oh, that's allowed. And then it takes you.
And of course, old photos where people were allowed to just
yeah.
chill out there
Yeah.
all the time for as long as they wanted to.
Absolutely.
And so along with this goes sort of being aware of your body and the fact that you take up space. One of the issues in Sirmione, am I saying that right, was you said basically when people were walking across this bridge, there was a certain point where it took a couple hours to cross this bridge, right? Because there were just crowds and you couldn't pass. And that can happen sometimes when, you're taking photos or anything like that. And it's so easy to just think, well, I'm small. I'm one person. I'm standing here taking a photo. That's all the space I'm taking up. But when 15 people do that, you become a crowd that blocks the street, and that can happen without you realizing it.
I was going to say, if I may jump in, that's very common in Venice, especially around like Carnivale or big times in the summer, especially. Most of the bridges in like the kind of center of Venice specifically, not in the middle of nowhere. You might see even like plein air painters or something there, but kind of around like Piazza di San Marco or even like between the train station and the piazza, basically, there's a lot of little bridges, and it's not uncommon for police and other guides to be posted out there telling you to not stand, because again, what happened, and you don't think about it, like, I mean, even sitting here, it's hard to imagine, I think, for me, having seen it, but one person stops to take a photo, somebody else stops near them because they want to take a photo next, and then all of a sudden there's 4 or 5 people like, oh, we're going to take photos here afterwards, so it becomes a thing, and now you can't get past, and you don't want to be the person that walks in front of somebody, I mean, I will, obviously, I've come to Italian at this point, so I'll walk into your photo, but then it's on the other side of the bridge is the same thing, so then there's no really to pass, so sometimes you will get police officers, especially in Venice, will come and be like, no, you cannot take a photo here, keep going. So there is a bit of a push to sort of limit choke points, I think, for and Sirmione, it was one day, it was May Day, tons of people, tons of day trippers coming in. Of course, they all want to take photos at the big thing, the big thing is the bridge. And so it made sense, but a lot of people are like, we can't do this frequently.
Right.
Like, this is not good. Like,
this
if we're all late to work
life
because of this, it becomes, and then of course a car comes through, so now everybody's pushed to the edge, the car, it becomes a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you're with a tour group, it can be very difficult to keep yourself out of the way.
Absolutely.
Just by the nature of already being in a group of people, you're taking up a lot of room. So that's just something to be aware of, that because sometimes tour guides will have to stop in a space where you might accidentally spill into the street or something like that. But it's important to remember that the tour guide is not responsible for you. You're responsible for yourself and keeping yourself out of the way.
And I think, and as I mentioned, that's a big one with tour guides specifically that we've noticed, that we've seen, is it's so common for people to kind of be posted up around the tour guide in the way of other things, whether it's in the street or whether it's in the sidewalks, alleyway, whatever it is. And then there's kind of a sense of like, I need to get through, but then they don't want to let you through because like, well, I'm in the tour right now, I'm listening. And I'm like, right.
They're like, it's not my fault. I'm in the tour, so I'm allowed to take up this space.
Like, tell the tour guide if you need to come through. And I'm like, no, I'm asking you as a person, I need to come through.
And our next tip, very adjacent to that, is respecting the space that you're in. And obviously, most people do this, but sometimes it's hard. So I'm thinking like in churches. Obviously, a lot of people who are wearing like a tank top will take a scarf and cover up their shoulders, and they're being very intentionally respectful of that space. But also, again, if you're with a group or just one other person, sometimes you can end up talking loudly without realizing it, or wandering around in a way that is a little less reverent and a little more just, oh my God, look at that cool thing. Hey, look at that crazy thing. And then wandering out and being loud and things like that. And it's not just about churches. I find even myself doing this if I'm in a restaurant and I'm not respecting other people by being too loud by accident or things like that, or just in a museum too. I get really excited about art, and sometimes I will raise my voice to talk to you about some cool thing that I've seen without realizing that I'm hindering someone else's experience by doing that. So it's just good to remember that you physically take up space. By being loud, you take up space. So just being reverent,
It is, and I will say, like we've talked, I think, sometimes before about how American tourists obviously get this sort of rep reputation for being very loud, which I think is true. I mean, there are definitely a lot of loud American tourists. However, honestly, this is not like only Americans are loud. We live near a touristy site, for lack of a better word, and it is deafening. And the only people there are Italians. It is just...
And like Italian school kids, my goodness, are they loud. Not all of them, but the ones that we see.
Yeah, and even when it's not school kids, it's families. They're talking over each other, and then it gets loud. And I think like, and you mentioned churches, like even we're not religious remotely,
No.
and we like, mostly go for like architectural purposes. I think you've brought me to a lot of churches because you'll look up like which one has like a Raphael in it, or which one has a, or whatever in it. So we go and look at the paintings. And it's interesting because I know that we do know people who because of this has a sense of irreverence around it, like in the sense of they don't respect it, because like I don't respect the church, so I'm not going to respect the place, which while I understand your argument, it's still the same thing of when you are a visitor in a place, it's sort of best, do as Romans do. It's just to respect.
It's still special to other people.
Exactly.
And that's why I bring up restaurants as well as museums. Other people there are still having a very special experience to them, or they're just living their life, and it's important to not interrupt that.
Exactly.
So one next tip, again, adjacent to those, is we were talking about clothing. And I guess a lot of people have this idea, of course, we did too, that like particularly Americans stand out when we wear like a baseball cap and white shoes. We've said this before. That's not a thing anymore.
No.
Lots of people wear baseball caps.
And white shoes.
Everybody wears white shoes. That's still a big trend.
New Balances, weirdly, a lot of people, like, unless you come with like the green stains on it from mowing the grass, you're going to see a lot of people with New Balances. Also, Skechers is a huge here. I don't understand like what kind of market share Skechers has, but it seems like half the people over 50 have a pair of Skechers on.
Yeah. I feel like I see Adidas with like a lot of young people.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but we're not endorsing any of those brands, just so y'all know.
Yeah, that was not go buy them.
Yeah.
But on the clothing, actually, we mentioned it because I think Sierra had this part of it was it's right on the lake, so it's common for people to come up from the lake into town with just a bikini on or a bathing suit on or a Speedo on or whatever it is, and that's not allowed by the town. There, it's just like, no, be dressed when you're walking through the town. And we've talked before, but I think Sorrento is the same way. They're like, a beach town in Italy is a very different thing than a beach town in America. For example, I think in America, Myrtle Beach, Florida, that type thing, it's like, yeah, we're just walking around in a bathing suit, of course. Even in Ohrid in North Macedonia, it was really common for people to go from the lake just to walk around town, no shirt, flip-flops, bathing suit, just having a time. And I'm like, yeah, of course, that's right, what you do. But in Italy, there is a lot more of a focus on, no, you're in town now. You're back in civilization, so we put on some clothes in civilization.
And it doesn't mean that you have to be fancy.
Oh God,
I think there's a lot of sometimes Italians, especially in the north, will just like look fancier in general day to day than other people. But it doesn't mean that you have to be fancy. A lot of people just wear shorts and a t-shirt and tennis shoes. That's fine. If you want to be extra Italian, go for smart casual. You know, when you're walking around a town. But like you said, the flip-flops and bikini thing is not really allowed.
I mean, flip-flops almost definitely are. You're fine with flip-flops. Just meant with the bikini specifically.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, yes, I should clarify. Some towns like Cinque Terre don't let you wear flip-flops on the trails, but that's a safety thing.
Yes.
You're right.
But I mean, like, so I was just thinking more like in this sort of, flip-flops are totally fine in the summer. For anybody listening, that's totally, and I will even add too, it's not appropriate to go into a store, even if you're dressed, like have a shirt on and a bathing suit and flip-flops, it's not appropriate to go in if you're wet from the beach still.
Oh yeah.
It's again, not illegal, I don't think. I mean, a store might have it against the rules, but it's still very much frowned upon. And then last, kind of on the note, I think this is partly in clothing and partly, I don't know, I think it's like on customs. There's just, again, some places don't have rules around this, but they definitely have a sort of societal norm around it. And on that note, though, it is, from our experience, having been to beaches for the last 7 years, it is very common for Italians that we've seen to, some people just arrive at the beach fully clothed, undress, and then get into their bathing suit there. Some people have it under their clothes. Some people just get naked and then redress.
Usually behind a towel, though.
Well, I'd say sometimes behind a towel. I feel like only because I think we've seen a number of times where there's just like kind of like, I'm just going to go over here a little bit and then get dressed. And it's like, okay, that's you're a foot or two. And I think like Rio Maggiore was a place that I kept noticing. I was like, oh, everybody's getting
that's true. I forgot about
naked over there, and then just redressing. And I will say though, it's a bit of a difference. I mean, a big thing I think we notice is nudity is a very different thing in Italy than in the States, especially. It's like, even though Italy is a very Catholic country, it doesn't have as much of a prudish nature, I think, towards nudity.
Yeah.
So especially on a beach, it's not the same thing. And again, we've talked about nude beaches and stuff like that, but just getting dressed is not like if like you just are, I don't know, changing out of your wet bathing suit into clothes. It's like such a common occurrence that everybody's like, yeah, of course you are. What, are you going to walk around in your bathing suit? So there is, and I only mention this because there is a balance. There's a shift. Like, it's kind of like I can't walk around in a bathing suit. What do I do then? Oh, you just get dressed in normal clothes. And so that's a totally common thing. And sometimes there are changing rooms and stuff, but even if they're not, as you mentioned, sometimes behind a towel, and sometimes a lot of times they'll just be like, nah, we're gonna just turn away from the crowd. And I'm like, right.
Usually people will find like they'll go behind a rock or something.
Yeah.
It's usually not like right in the middle of the beach, completely stripping down.
Yeah.
In case you're like really excited about that as a tourist.
This is why I go to Italy.
That was a joke, just to be clear.
Yes, probably don't do that. Actually, please don't tell us. Please don't tell people you learned it from our podcast either.
Well, Nathaniel told me that I can do this in the middle of the beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna get sued.
So let's hop into something that's not really related, but you mentioned this earlier, that there are in Sirmione these what are they called, tutors?
Yeah, I think it's safety tutors.
Street
tutors.
Who are there to tell you essentially like, oh, don't sit on that thing, that's not allowed, or hey guys, keep moving so that we don't clog up this bridge. Most cities don't have that. That's pretty specific. But for instance, when we went to Venice for Carnevale, they upped the police presence to keep people moving. Essentially, was almost all of their responsibility. Obviously, they're keeping people safe, but they're helping people move quickly and not clog up the streets, which is also a safety issue. And we saw a lot of people asking them for directions and for help in that way more than in like, hello, I have an emergency. So the tip is police are not there to give you directions. And it makes sense that you would think that that's something very appropriate to ask. And it's okay sometimes, but just remember that's not their job. They're there for public safety. But it makes sense that you'd think that, or that lots of people would think that, oh, of course I can just go ask a police officer for directions. They don't care. I was taught as a kid, like if you get lost, go ask the police officer. I mean, as an adult in the US, if I'm lost, sometimes I'll find someone official, essentially.
I mean, you see TV shows when you're a kid and you're like, talk to a police officer if you're lost.
Right.
That's like a big thing.
Exactly. But there's also the sense that I think especially in touristy places that these police officers are a bit overrun and overwhelmed with people asking those kinds of questions rather than being able to focus on what their actual job is.
And if I can piggyback, part of it, it's asking directions and it's a lot of it is, well, people, essentially, there is a thing where people will say, do you know how to get to hotel so-and-so? Which is like the most useless question you could ask somebody, because they're like, I've literally never heard of that hotel before. I live in Rome. There's 6,000 hotels in the city. Could you give me something else to go on? But a lot of times people don't remember the neighborhood, or they don't remember what it's near, or they'll say, oh, it's near like the Sistine Chapel, which it's like, okay, you mean the Vatican, I assume. And then even from there, it's like, okay, but like in Prati, or like just on that side of the river, because that can be a totally different thing. And so when you say that the police aren't there to give directions, they can, to be very clear, especially if they're near something. Like, I'm so sorry. Which way do I?
Where's this major thing?
Yeah. But a lot of it is just, or if you're lost, like I'm sorry. I'm completely lost. I don't know where to go. Can you help me? But it is like, it's essentially they are a trained police force who are there to keep people safe and to keep things from getting out of hand. And so, and I guess part of that too is if they feel, if you're getting cold, like energy kind of nature, sort of expressions from them, it's because they're like, I'm not here to make you a happy person. I'm here to make sure that this site is protected and the people at it, and especially around the Trevi Fountain, or especially around the Spanish Steps, again, in Rome specifically, where they are not happy campers. But again, I mean, you can kind of imagine, you go to, I don't know how long it takes to become a police officer in Italy. I think longer than the 6 weeks it does in the States, I'm pretty sure. And then, and then you get posted up at like the Trevi Fountain just to tell people not to sit.
Yeah.
It feels like, come on, man. Thought we were going to do something interesting. Maybe not. Maybe it could be a great posting, but it doesn't seem like it, judging by everybody's entire lack of enthusiasm.
Yes.
So thank you. Yeah, that was good.
Okay, so my next tip, piggybacking off of that, is that if you can, just learn a few words of essential Italian.
Yes.
Which is like, where's the bathroom? And can I have this thing? Like if you're looking at a menu.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you.
Huge.
Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Hi.
Yeah.
Good morning. Yeah. Buonasera. Which I think we've said this before. It is a hazy area in the afternoon, after lunch period of, is it still buongiorno or is it buonasera? No one knows. Just throw one out there.
4:00, buongiorno, good morning. 4:30, buonasera, good afternoon. And sometimes some people forget what time it is, and it's like 5:15. They go buongiorno, and then they will turn around and call, but you're like 10 feet away, and they'll call back at you, buonasera, scusami. And I'm like, I love that you called me back to say
very important.
Good afternoon. So yeah, that one's, when I will say, if I may too, not to sort of, to mellow some of these tips out, I will say there's like we want to give these tips of like, this is the tip, learn some language. And then like to sort of smooth it out a little bit, because again, there's so many things on your mind probably when you're taking a trip.
Oh, of course.
You're not, but I know that some of you too are like on sort of language learning apps, Babbel, whatever it is, Rosetta Stone, and you're I want to learn some words. I really want to communicate. I will say Italy, I think Spain and Portugal, I've heard the same, but I know Italy is, especially Southern Italy, kind of famous for, if you got like 3 words of Italian, people will love you.
Yeah.
It is just the effort you put in. And I will also say too, if you've lived in learning some Italian and you feel kind of confident, if you're like, I think I'm okay, and you start speaking Italian to somebody, there is a natural sort of discourse that happens where you speak Italian and they're going to respond in English because they understand from your accent that you probably natively speak English. This is not, almost never would I say, is this a cue for you to then switch back to English. It's not rude to continue in Italian. Like even you and I, who, I mean, I think at this point with some words, we have a pretty good Italian accent, because I'm like, I say it the same as they say it. But then people know we're from America, so it's like they'll default to English. And it's not rude if we continue the conversation in Italian and they continue in English. There's no like, oh, I speak it better. It's just like they get to practice their English. I get to practice my Italian. This is fine.
And that's the thing. Sometimes people here, especially if they work in the tourist industry, they might very likely speak English very, very well. And they might be speaking English because they speak better English than you speak Italian, and it's faster for them. Like I'm saying, especially in the tourist industry, where they're like, I just need to answer your question so that I can keep going with my day.
100%, yeah.
But other times, people just want to try out their English. Like they're just excited to be able to practice.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing that I'm very nervous speaking Italian still, and of course, a lot of Italians
6 years after you've been here.
Yeah. And a lot of Italians are nervous to speak and use their English, but sometimes they're just like super stoked to be able to try this thing they've been working on. So it's important to remember, or it's important, I should say, for me to remember sometimes that just because an Italian is speaking English to me doesn't mean that they think they're like smarter than me or they're trying to flex or anything. They might just be super excited.
And especially, I think it opens up a lot of doors when you speak broken or badly accented Italian, not like grazie.
Right.
Mi dispiace, then people are going to be like, please don't. But like if you try to give it a little accent, then it opens up that door of sort of, oh, they're willing to kind of not make a fool of themselves, but there's a lack of embarrassment. They're like, oh, they're willing, like you, dear tourist, are willing to embarrass yourself slightly by speaking a language you're not comfortable with. Right. And that allows them to do the same thing. Whether it's just please and thank you, because they all also might know please and thank you. And I will say the reason, if in case you're like, how does that fit in Overtourism? The reason is it encourages you, like basically we're also encouraging you to kind of be a more mindful tourist. And part of that is trying to, the energy difference, I guess, the sort of emotional difference of when you walk into like a gelato place and you immediately start with the English of like, yo, can I get like a stracciatella or stracciatella? I don't even know how you would say that in Italian American accent.
It's also the way words are used in different languages is different and important. So like, at least maybe this could be particular to us, but I think a lot of Americans, speaking of it, a gelato shop, when you go into an ice cream shop, you'll say like, yeah, I'll do the strawberry and the vanilla.
Are you doing an American accent there?
Yeah, I am.
I love that. I'll do like can I get like the strawberry?
I think I was being like a bro.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. Famous bros in gelato shops.
That's not how I sound when I speak English, obviously.
I kind of love that.
But I will say sometimes I'll slip into saying the I'll do the so-and-so.
Or let me get the, that's another one.
Yeah, let me get the so-and-so, exactly. But in Italian, I say posso avere, which is can I have, which you can say that in English, but we tend to not.
It's also quite direct. I think both, at least American English and what I know is British English is very roundabout.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not just like, give me the blank. It's, actually, could I actually have the blank of blank with a so-and-so? And that's a little bit nicer than give me this and give me that. Thank you.
But I think with a smile, you can say, posso avere il, I don't know, pistacchio.
Exactly.
Can I have the pistachio one, please? Per favore is please. So there's just a difference around certain language where in English, it's like, aggressive, like, I'm going to do this thing. Where in Italian, the way I speak it, at least, is like, could I please have this thing?
But it's also maybe not aggression, but it's also if I may, it's more of a what you can communicate. Because I think even if you speak English, not natively, but if you've learned English as a second language, can I get thee? It's kind of like, can you get what, can you, okay, I think I can put together what you're saying, but that's a kind of a native slang. That's not something you're going to learn in school.
Right.
If that makes sense. So I mean, it might not be aggression so much as it is just, I think like, I think it's just more of just clear communication.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I think that's like learning a couple words of Italian. Again, please do not like spend years learning Italian. There's just more of buongiorno when you go into a place, changes the energy. But you go into a place and you say, how you doing? Or what's up? Or good morning. They're just like, what? Don't do that, please. Like, even if you're like, oh, this is a nice thing to say where I'm from, try it in Italian, I guess. So that's the over-tourism is just one of the things that I think people don't like certain types of tourists is because it's like, it's not so much, it's over-tourism sometimes. It's just a lot of a type of tourist that it's the type of tourist that goes home and it's like, the thing I hated the most about Ibiza is the fact that nobody there would respond to me in English. It's like, right, it's Spain.
Yeah.
Or, whatever. I think there's a lot of times there's like that sort of, like I really wanted them to respond to me always in English. And it's like, they don't do that.
Right. Exactly. So speaking of gelato shops, let's talk about the local economy.
Yeah.
So this is a very broad tip, but it's just that to the best of your ability, shop at local shops that are not, big brands. Eat at restaurants that seem more local than they do catering to tourists, and certainly not try not to go to chains. Like a big easy one is you can choose a local cafe rather than going to Starbucks.
Oh, for sure.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
And this one is a bit more nebulous, but like if you're booking a tour, do your best to book someone who is small and local, not a giant chain of
like a tour company chain. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just to because you have the opportunity to do a little bit to support the local economy. But it is very easy to only support a global economy by choosing chains and big companies.
And if I may just on that note, and that kind of goes back to this over-tourism, good versus bad over-tourism. If there's a good over-tourism, I think it's something that in Italy, I've noticed you have a bit more of a choice. Like I think in the States, it was really hard to always go local because even when someone's like shop local, at some point I can't, it's like, well, there is no local for this. There is only the big store for this. And even like farmers markets in Savannah, there is one. But it's sometimes really difficult because it's 3 or 4 times more expensive. Not so in Italy. In fact, it's often a lot cheaper at a farmer's market to get things than from the grocery store. Or if you're going to get pasta, it's often a lot cheaper to go a locally making dry pasta or fresh pasta. Not always, but sometimes. And on just as you mentioned with this, whether it's tour guides or whether it's lodging, anything like that, it's essentially, I think people are a little bit more, I've noticed that when the conversation turns into over-tourism as just a general idea, there a lot of people, at least who live in Italy, are okay with it. If it's like, if you're coming here and trying to put money into the people who live here, it's different. But if you're only putting money into something that's immediately going to be taken out of this area, then it's harder to support that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think it's a very nebulous one. I will say for those listening, it's because it's something that works anywhere, but it is even the small things, like if you're going to have to shop at a big grocery store, a lot of Italians would prefer that you shop potentially at like Conad or which is it's an Italian grocery store owned by Italians, versus like Lidl, which is a German grocery store.
Is Coop?
I think it's Italian. Yeah.
I think so too. Okay.
And so there's a few, there's a good chance you're going to run into, there's like 5 Italian grocery stores and like 1 or 2 that are not. I think Pam hilariously is Italian just because the name's Pam. And so, it's not like, impossible, but it's also the same thing. Like maybe there's a corner store or a bottega or something like that you can get something from before the big grocery store.
And largely Italy is a bit like old school America, where there's still the bakery and the butcher and the cheese shop. So if you're into food, I guess, and if you're here for a long enough period that you can take the time to go to those individual shops, that goes really far to helping the local economy rather than buying, prepackaged bread at the grocery store off the shelf.
That might not be. And I will say, actually, so on that note, some of those grocery stores do only sell bread from that area, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
or they have their own bakery.
Or they have their own bakery
in the shop. Yeah,
which is nice. But at least for meat and stuff, rarely, if ever, will the meat counter in a grocery store sell anything local. But sometimes a local butcher will be like, this is local. This is from down the street, kind of thing. So
exactly.
Again, this is a nebulous one, not nebulous. It's a broad one, I would say, but it is something that I think is important for when you're here to sort of try as much as you can. You know, that difference between giving somebody who lives and works and grows food in or whatever it is, 20 euros versus somebody who, you know, is working minimum wage at the grocery store, and that money's going to go, I don't know, somewhere else. It's kind of different. I think people just have a different response to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like a little thing that you can do that when we all do it, genuinely makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And I think our last tip is related to this, and it is about Airbnb.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. So I think a lot of us know, we've all read articles about it. Airbnb being so prolific has really hurt a lot of economies.
Yes.
And the alternative, just off the top, is to stay at a hotel or a what you know is a B&B, like a bed and breakfast, which I guess in Italy would be kind of a version of a pensione. That one's hard. That one's hard here to do.
Harder to find.
Yeah, harder to find. But the thing that you can do to avoid it is just don't book through Airbnb. Don't book through VRBO. Don't book things where people are renting out an apartment. Because oftentimes these days, it's not someone renting out their apartment when they're away. It's people who have purchased or own an apartment that could be rented to a local person full-time that they are using to make more money to rent part-time, and that ends up ruining neighborhoods and increasing rent.
And if I may just jump in there, that is possibly the biggest. At the beginning of this episode, we mentioned like we really don't think, our personal opinion, that you as a tourist is really the issue, because you're kind of a product maybe or a symptom of the issue, but you're not really the core issue. You being in a place doesn't really affect the thing, but the thing is you have no choice sometimes when you're in a place except to follow this sort of what's been laid out for you.
The structure that's already been laid out, yeah.
So it's like, you know, if and sometimes straight up, we've noticed there are no hotels in places. I mean, that's not uncommon, especially in like the small Italian towns, for example. There used to be at least one pensione or one hotel in every town just because family would come and visit or something like that. So there'd have to be one place that could put up 4 or 5 people, but that's slowly turning into not a thing anymore. So Airbnb sort of has replaced it. Likewise, I know for a fact this is a big issue in Venice, is the people of Venice, while they don't like the city councilors and stuff like that for like encouraging a massive Jeff Bezos wedding, all this money, they're like, all the money we're making, I think they're going to make like 13 million euros as a city. But again, it's the same thing of like, where's it going? What is it doing? And the amount of headache you're putting on the people of Venice for this, that they don't personally get anything. We're not all getting €1,000 check in the mail for this. So I think there's that natural headbutting, I guess, or butting of heads, I should say. But also in Venice specifically, when you read or talk to these people who are against Airbnb, they have a lot of anger directed towards their fellow Venetians who have rented out their grandmother's house or their parents' house or their upstairs. They own the upstairs and the downstairs. They decided they only want to live in the downstairs. So I'll rent out the upstairs. And it would have been 15, 20 years ago, they would have rented out to a student or somebody living in town or a worker, maybe a hospitality worker. But now they're only doing it through Airbnb because they'd make more money. And I think that's the thing, is it's a kind of I guess it's a balance of like, it's not, I don't know, I get the sense that it's not so much that people hate the tourists who stay at the Airbnb, especially when it's the only choice. It's just they hate the fact that their neighbor did this, feeling like they kind of got stabbed in the back. And then they hate everybody who stays there because it's like, you could have chosen not to.
Yeah.
You could have absolutely chosen to stay in a hotel, especially in a place like Venice. There are plenty of hotels. So I will say it, again, from my experience, from my perception, and I think you and I have a pretty anti-Airbnb stance. I will also be honest, that is not a always thing. I think we've stayed Airbnbs before. We like them. We tend to stay places like, especially before we lived in Italy full time, we would stay someplace for usually a month, minimum a month, 3 months.
And it was only possible through Airbnb. We couldn't afford to stay at a hotel for that long.
Exactly.
However, I think it's changed a bit. I mean, we don't stay in Airbnbs for that long anymore, but also it seems to me that the price has kind of leveled out for comparing Airbnbs to hotels. A lot of the times now, we don't stay in Airbnbs, but I will look for like a price comparison just out of interest. And it seems that a lot of the time, an Airbnb for the night is the same price as a hotel for the night.
Oh, for sure. Plus, there's no like weird hidden cleaning fee they're going to smack you with at the end of it.
And that's something to keep in mind. This is not like an over-tourism thing, but it's for your own experience. It's sometimes what you see on Airbnb is not what you get. Where a hotel is more likely to be closer to what they advertise, I think. We've had a few bad experiences staying in, people renting out their apartment. It looks really great online, but then you get there and it turns out there's no one actually there to meet you. You have to call them and get a key code to get in, and sometimes they're not available. And then sometimes the room is like, oh, yeah, I mean, maybe 5 years ago it looked like what you posted on the site, and things like that.
And also, though, in a hotel you have a problem, you go to the front desk and you explain your problem. In an Airbnb, you have to call the number and explain. I mean, this is much worse when we didn't really speak Italian, because we have to communicate with people who were Italian that, usually through Google Translate, but they always, I love Italians, they always want to call you. I'm like, don't call. I don't speak the language. You don't speak. Neither of us speak a common language.
Can we do a texting situation?
Yeah,
nope, they're going to call you.
I need to translate this. So that was a big thing. And then, but it's always like, there's only one towel here, or there's only one this thing, or this thing is dirty, or this thing is broken. And again, in a hotel, you just go down and like, hey, there's no hot water in the room. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll fix that. No worries. So I will say we've gotten, I think we first ever traveled 2013, whenever I was traveling, 2014, traveling together. We would travel in hotels, and then it was like, oh, Airbnbs, because we started staying place at a month or two at a time, 3 months at a time. We needed the kitchen, plus Airbnb would, I think it encouraged people to offer a discount, like a 50% discount. For
long term, yeah.
So we'd like get a half price sort of Airbnb. We're like, this is actually nice. You get to live in a place for a month or two. And then now I think it's kind of, with the rise in price and the fact that it's harder to, I think just on a moral level, it's hard to know when you're like, when people are like, here's what Airbnb is a problem. Destroying a local economy, pushing people out, pushing out residents, even Savannah has this, it's kind of a ghost town in certain times of year where there's just no one
Especially
there.
like in the downtown
in the downtown area. There's no one there because it's like they're only short-term vacation rentals.
Right.
And so it's just when nobody's staying there, though, entire neighborhoods are practically empty. And so, I mean, part of it is a safety thing, because there's no one to, there's no one out and about.
There's no neighborhood watch going.
And part of it's just a lot of people in Savannah, like genuinely a lot of Savannians just simply don't go downtown anymore. Like it's a nightmare. It's bad driving. It's tourists everywhere. It's people don't know how to, and I think it's the same thing though. It's that energy of like, I don't feel comfortable in my own town.
Right.
It has extended, I think, to not has extended at all, but like is also prevalent in a lot of Italy, where a lot of people are like, I don't go to that part of, Rome anymore. I don't go to that part of Venice. I just can't. It's impossible. It's not fun anymore. So if that makes sense, I think it's just
absolutely.
There you go.
And I think likewise, just like you're saying, I don't know any people who live in Savannah who have a specific hatred towards, like, they're not going to go see a tourist on the street and be like, I hate that person, they're a tourist.
No.
Same thing here. Like, people aren't singling out tourists to hate, but it's a system that isn't working that breeds a lot of negative feelings.
And on that note, I will say that all this episode, it isn't actually, hopefully it doesn't sound too complaining. It's not to complain or anything like that. It's just, I mean, it's things you probably already know. And it's, I guess, in a direct response to some of these articles and some of these people saying that you, the tourists, are the problem. And I think, and again, we're probably the minority here potentially. We really don't believe tourists are the problem. There are problem tourists. There are definitely people, as you mentioned, swimming in the fountains, carving their name into the thing. We get it. That's not, don't do that. Please don't do that.
And we don't think y'all are doing that.
No. But I think genuinely, like, from even some of the comments and some of the questions y'all have sent in, you all have, I mean, I'm basing this on the comments and questions, so maybe not all of you, but the vocal ones of you do seem genuinely really respectful and are really wanting,
super, yeah.
Like, how do I do this in a way that, that isn't going to affect the trip? Or how do I do something? Is this rude to do this thing? I don't want to, I really don't want to come across as rude, or especially if it's like a dietary thing, or if it's a traveling thing, or if it's a mobility thing, whatever it is. So I think a lot of you, and the reason we're saying this is, you might experience some not hate, that's really strong, distaste. Yeah. People might be sort of just like, oh God, another tourist. And especially is like, September, October, we have noticed, especially when we're in the north, it is prevalent. There's a like, I just want this to be over. And we want to say, I guess, don't take it personally. It really isn't about you. It is about a much larger issue, a mix of Airbnb and city councilors who can't see past the fact that they're going to make money from this, and 500 TikTok and Instagram and all these other things. And at the same time, there are things you can do that even if you don't go around telling people, oh, I'm staying at a hotel and I'm only buying from,
Right.
local vendors and I'm only doing this thing. You don't have to tell that to people, but it's still I don't know. It's like, the amount of times I think it seems like somebody's really excited to see us the second time they see us at like a farm stand. I'm saying it's a farm stand, like that's a thing, but like when we go to the Trionfale market in Rome, for example, it's an indoor like green grocery market. And you go to somebody the first time, they're like, hey, cool, tourist, and they sell you zucchini. And you go the next day or whatever it is, and there's like, oh, you came back.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think there's a little bit of like I don't know, it's just there's an excitement when people realize that you are trying to make an effort, I think. And it's a kind of I don't know, maybe it's just like a nice ego boost, I guess, but sometimes it feels really good because you're just...
But I think this is a big generalization, but I think it holds true pretty well, is that so many Italians are excited to share things, like share their culture, share their food, share their whatever with people. So I think like when you go back to the cheese stand for the second time and she's like, oh my gosh, I get to share this with you again. It's not like a superficial interaction. This is us connecting now, So I think that that's just to say that Italians generally are very excited to share with you. And when they see that you're putting in an effort to participate, they're like, yes, we're doing this together and we're sharing something,
It's a totally different experience. And I think honestly again, personal, this is my personal opinion, but that's almost how you have a better experience in Italy. It's not necessarily going through the checklist and doing everything and whatever, I went to Venice, I went to Florence, I went to Siena, but it's I don't know, trying to make up like a couple personal connections.
Yeah, genuine connections. Absolutely.
And then it does genuinely, not to use that word too many times, change your trip. It changes your experience.
Absolutely.
So I think that's everything.
I think that's it.
We hope that some of this was helpful. We hope that things you already kind of knew, but also maybe even if you didn't know it, fantastic. We're glad we could teach you something, but also as a way of like possibly just assuaging any sense of guilt or doubt or fear.
Right.
That's another big one. And
taking away the shame. Like it's not your fault, listener, that places are being over touristed. It's a problem that involves a lot of people, and we don't want you to feel shame, like Nathaniel said at the top of the episode, for taking a commercial flight here. Like, you're doing your best. Travel expands your mind. We believe you should travel. It's a travel podcast. Obviously, we think you should do that.
We're very biased.
Travel is good for you. And as long as you're doing your best to be kind and respectful wherever you are, that's all you can do.
Yeah, exactly. So we hope this helps. We hope that you've learned something or at least enjoyed.
And if you have any questions, like we said, you can email us at onlyabag. What is it?
Podcast.
onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast, and also on Blue Sky.
Yes, at Only a Bag on Blue Sky.
Yeah, and you can reach out if you have any questions about your trip. If you're like, oh, I did this thing, was it rude? We'll let you know. Absolutely. We also have onlyabag.com. We have a comment box there, comment form there. And if you'd like to support this podcast in a financial sense, you can do so with Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/onlyabag. All the links will be in the description. And thank you all so much for listening. Thanks for listening. Tanti abbracci.